I sat in my favorite armchair by the window, watching Douglas drive away in his black Mercedes, just like he had done so many times before lately. The morning sun caught the polished metal of his car as it disappeared around the corner of our tree-lined suburban street. "Another business trip," he'd said without meeting my eyes, his voice distant and detached. "I'll be back in 3 days." I sipped my coffee slowly from the delicate porcelain cup we'd bought during our 20th anniversary trip to Vienna, my heart aching with memories of better days. Back then, everything had been different. The way Douglas would look at me with those gentle eyes of his, holding my hand as we planned our future together. "Something has changed," I whispered to myself, gazing at our old photographs displayed on the mantelpiece, each frame holding moments of what I once thought was our perfect life. That's when Jody burst in without knocking, just as she'd done for the past 30 years of our friendship. "I saw Douglas leaving," she announced, removing her wide-brimmed hat and settling into the chair across from me. "Another business trip?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of something that made my stomach tighten. I carefully placed my coffee cup on the antique side table. "That's what he says." "Third time this month," Jody observed, leaning forward in her seat. "And you believe that?" "Why wouldn't I?" I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't cooperate. "Honey," Jody hesitated, her face lined with concern as she leaned closer. "I hate to be the one to tell you this, but I saw him at a restaurant last week, and he wasn't alone." My heart skipped a beat, and suddenly the room felt too warm. "What do you mean?" "He was with a younger woman," Jody continued softly, her eyes full of sympathy. "And she didn't look like any business partner I've ever seen." I stood up and walked to the window, my fingers brushing against the cool glass. "Maybe she was a client," I suggested weakly, clinging to logic like a lifeline. "After all, he is in real estate." "Abigail," Jody's voice was barely above a whisper. He was holding her hand, and the way he looked at her. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock that had marked every hour of our marriage for the past 42 years. I continued to gaze out the window, struggling to maintain my composure in spite of the storm brewing inside me. "You know," I finally spoke, my voice barely steady, "he's been dealing in cash lately, lots of it. Says it's more convenient for business, but he used to do everything through the bank." Jody approached me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder that felt like an anchor in my sea of uncertainty. Jody approached and gently placed her hand on my shoulder. "You have a right to know the truth, Abigail. And I will find out." That night, I pulled out my old diary from the drawer, its leather cover worn smooth by years of confessions. I began documenting every suspicious detail of Douglas's behavior. The dates of his business trips, the amounts withdrawn from our accounts, the mysterious phone calls that ended when I entered the room. 42 years of marriage, I whispered, staring at our wedding photo where we looked so young, so trusting, so in love. Was it all a lie? I felt something new stirring in my heart, something harder and colder than mere doubt or anger. It was determination. An icy resolve to uncover the truth, no matter how bitter it might taste. Sleep eluded me that night as I lay in our king-sized bed that suddenly felt far too empty and vast. My mind wandered through the gradual changes that had crept into our lives like autumn frost. First, it was the flashy new ties, so different from his usual conservative taste. Then came the expensive cologne, a scent I'd never known him to wear in all our years together. Douglas started going to the gym, though he'd always claimed gardening was the only exercise he needed. "I want to stay in shape," he'd answered when I questioned him, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's important at our age." I walked to his closet and opened his side, my fingers trembling slightly as I pushed aside the hangers. Designer suits hung there in their protective covers, price tags removed but not their memory. Too many zeros, I thought, running my hand along the fine wool fabric. And he claimed they were all on sale. I picked up the phone and dialed our youngest daughter, Alice. Mom, her sleepy voice was tinged with worry. Is everything all right? I'm fine, sweetheart, I assured her, though fine was the last thing I felt. Just can't sleep. Is Dad away on another business trip? I sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of my suspicions pressing down on me. Yes, Alice, I said softly. Have you noticed anything different about your father's behavior lately? There was a long silence on the other end of the line, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Alice spoke, her voice trembling slightly. Mom, I didn't want to worry you, but I saw him at the shopping mall last week, buying women's jewelry. I felt my hands begin to shake as a cold chill ran down my spine. Perhaps it's a gift for me, I suggested, though my heart knew better. Mom, your birthday isn't for another 5 months, and it wasn't the kind of jewelry you'd wear. I stared at my wedding ring, the simple gold band Douglas had placed on my finger 42 years ago. His words echoed in my memory like a bitter mockery. This is a symbol of our eternal love. Thank you for telling me, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Good night, sweetheart. I woke up the next morning with a clear plan of action taking shape in my mind. I called Melissa, an old friend who worked at the bank where Douglas and I held our joint accounts. Melissa, I need your help, I said as I met her at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. Is this about the accounts? Melissa asked, stirring her coffee with practiced precision. Yes, I need to see all of Douglas's transactions for the past 6 months. Melissa fixed me with a concerned look, her eyes searching my face. Abigail, you know this is confidential information, don't you? I also know something's happening behind my back, and I have a right to know what it is. Melissa sighed, her shoulders dropping in resignation. All right, but this stays between us. When I returned home, I sat at my old desk, its familiar surface worn smooth by decades of bill paying and letter writing. I took out my notebook and began meticulously documenting every suspicious expenditure. The evidence piled up like a mountain: restaurants I had never been to, large withdrawals from various branches, purchases at women's boutiques. $2,000 in just 1 month? I whispered, adding up the figures with trembling fingers. Douglas, what have you been spending this on? Suddenly, the doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts like a knife through silk. Jody stood at the doorstep, holding a box of her homemade cookies, her presence as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold night. I thought it would be better if you weren't alone, she said, entering the house with her usual air of detachment. Jody, I closed the door and turned to face her, my heart pounding with the question I'd been dreading to ask. Tell me the truth. What did she look like, the woman at the restaurant? Jody placed the cookie box on the table, her movements deliberately slow. Are you sure you want to know? Yes, I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. About 35, slim and sophisticated, blonde, wearing expensive clothes that screamed new money. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in my throat like broken glass. I see a younger version of me. Abigail, what are you going to do? I walked to the window, gazing out at the garden Douglas and I had tenderly nurtured together over the years. For now, I'll watch and gather information, I said, my voice taking on a steel edge I didn't know I possessed. Then I turned back to my friend, feeling a sharp glint of determination in my eyes. And then, I'll make him regret his betrayal. Sunday mornings had always been my time of peace and reflection, when Douglas and I would share breakfast on the porch and plan our week together. But today was different, the house emptier than a church on a Saturday night. Douglas was gone again, leaving nothing but silence in his wake. I climbed the stairs slowly to our shared study, where the expensive scent of his new cigarettes hung in the air like an unwelcome guest. I need some air, I murmured, opening the window to let in the crisp morning breeze. My eyes fell on the large oak desk where we'd spent countless afternoons balancing checkbooks and planning our future together. Now, Douglas kept the drawers locked, the key always with him like a guilty secret. "Don't worry about the business matters," he'd say with that new, awkward smile that never quite reached his eyes. I approached the desk, running my fingers across its polished surface, memories flowing through my fingertips. Suddenly, my fingers caught on something at the edge. A small envelope, taped underneath. "What's this?" I whispered, carefully peeling it away. Inside was a small key, its brass surface glinting in the morning light. My heart began to race, thunder in my chest like a summer storm. I know I shouldn't do this, I thought to myself, moral uncertainty warring with desperate need. But after 42 years together, don't I have the right to know? The key fit perfectly into the drawer's lock, like destiny itself had placed it in my hands. Inside, I found neatly folded documents, their crisp edges holding secrets I wasn't sure I was ready to face. I began turning the pages with trembling hands, each rustle of paper like a whisper of betrayal. Everest National Bank? I questioned, my mind reeling with confusion. We've never had an account there. But the records told a different story, cold hard facts that shattered my assumptions. A secret account opened in Douglas's name 6 months ago, and then there was the amount. I had to sit down, my legs suddenly weak beneath me. $121,000? I whispered into the emptiness of the study. Where did all this money come from? I continued leafing through the documents, each page revealing another piece of the puzzle. Every paper told its own damning story. Regular transfers from our joint account, large cash withdrawals, unexplained expenses that built up like storm clouds. The phone's sharp ring cut through my concentration like a knife. It was Jody, her voice urgent and strained. "I thought you should know," she said without preamble, "I just saw them again." "Where?" I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. "At the jewelry store on Oak Street. They were choosing rings." Silence hung heavy in the air, thick as morning fog. I stared at the documents spread before me, my world tilting on its axis. "Tell me everything, Jody." She was holding his hand, laughing, and he looked happy. "Abigail, I hate to say this, but..." I closed my eyes, bracing myself against the pain. "Go on." "They spent almost an hour in the store, then went to that new French restaurant. The one I've been asking him to take me to for our anniversary?" "Yes," Jody answered softly, her voice barely a whisper. I hung up the phone and turned back to the documents, pieces falling into place like a macabre puzzle. Everything connected now. The expensive gifts, the restaurants, the secret meetings. I realized with a cold certainty that Douglas was preparing for a new life, one that didn't include me. Carefully, I returned all the papers to the drawer, except for the Everest National Bank statement, which I slipped into my robe pocket like a loaded gun. As I was descending the stairs, I heard the front door open, and my heart nearly stopped. Douglas was home early. "Darling," he called up to me, his voice honey-sweet with deception. "I've brought you a present." I paused on the stairs, trying to steady myself as memories of happier days clashed with my new reality. His voice carried a false cheerfulness I'd never noticed before, and I wondered how long he'd been putting on this performance. "Coming, darling," I called back, forcing a smile into my voice that felt like broken glass in my throat. In the entryway, Douglas stood holding a box from our local candy store, filled with my favorite bonbons. Once, such a gesture would have melted my heart, but now I recognized it for what it was, just another attempt to mask his guilt. "How was your business trip?" I asked, accepting his gift with hands that wanted to tremble. "Oh, excellent," he replied, brushing his lips against my cheek in a kiss that felt as hollow as his words. "Secured a new contract. We're developing a residential area. Lies, I thought, maintaining my smile like a well-worn mask. That's wonderful. Will you tell me more about it over dinner? Sorry, he glanced at his watch, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before. Important meeting tonight. Don't wait up for me. After he closed the door, I watched from the window as his car disappeared around the curve, taking my trust with it. The bank statement in my robe pocket felt heavy as lead, concrete evidence of his infidelity. But it wasn't enough. I needed to uncover everything. Monday morning arrived with an eerie calm settling over me like morning mist. The night before, I'd lain awake listening to Douglas's peaceful breathing, plotting my next moves like a general before battle. Heading to the office today? I asked casually, pouring his coffee just as I had for countless mornings before. Yes, indeed, Douglas answered, his eyes glued to his phone screen. Lots to do with the new project. I noticed the slight smile playing on his lips as he read his messages. The same smile he used to have when reading the little notes I'd slip into his briefcase. I'm meeting Jody today, I said with carefully crafted indifference. We're finally going antique shopping after all this time. Oh, that's nice, Douglas replied absently. Have fun. I smiled and thought to myself, how generous of him, with bitter irony in my heart. Instead of my usual suit, I pulled out an old coat I bought for a masquerade party from the closet, its vintage style perfect for my purpose. Perfect, I whispered to my reflection in the mirror, no one would recognize me as Douglas Smith's successful businessman's wife. I took a taxi to Douglas's office, my heart pounding with each mile we covered. 15 minutes later, I was seated in a small cafe, watching the building's entrance like a hawk stalking its prey. Another coffee, please, I asked the waitress, settling in for my vigil. After 2 hours of waiting, I suddenly spotted Douglas emerging from the building. But instead of heading to his Mercedes, he walked toward a modest Ford parked nearby. So now he's driving 2 cars, I whispered, pulling out my phone to text my nephew Sean, who worked for the police. I need information on a Ford Focus, license plate DEF 5432, it's important. The reply came 10 minutes later, car was rented 3 months ago, registered to Douglas Smith. I hailed another taxi and followed the Ford through the city streets like a detective in those old noir films. Douglas's car stopped in front of a luxury apartment complex in an upscale neighborhood. Wait here, I instructed the driver, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Douglas stepped out of the car carrying roses and a bag from an expensive boutique, like a scene from some romantic movie I'd rather not be watching. I took out my phone and snapped several photos, documenting his betrayal with cold precision. To Everest National Bank next, I directed the taxi driver. At the bank, bad news awaited me like a slap in the face. I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, the young banker said with practiced politeness. We cannot provide any information without the account holder present. But I'm his wife, I protested, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Unfortunately, this is a private account, and family access is not authorized. Back home, I sat in the study and began documenting everything in my diary like a court stenographer. Monday, rental car. Riverside Park Residences. Unit number unknown. Roses and Chanel shopping bag. The phone's ring interrupted my writing, and it was Alice. Mom, are you okay? Something strange is going on with Dad. I sighed, feeling the weight of secrets pressing down on me. What do you mean? Dad just called. Alice's words echoed in my mind like a warning bell. He asked to borrow $10,000, said it was for urgent business. I gripped my pencil tightly, feeling the wood bite into my palm. What did you tell him? I asked Alice. I told him I needed to discuss it with Ryan first. Mom, Dad asking us for money. It's not right. What's really going on? Don't worry, I said soothingly, though my own heart was racing. I'll handle this. That night, Douglas came home trailing expensive cologne like a guilty signature. Sorry I'm late, work ran long, he called out as he headed straight for the bedroom. I watched him climb the stairs, each step echoing with the lies he'd told me. My chest ached thinking about how he was living his double life while desperately enough to ask our daughter for money. Good night, I whispered after he entered the bedroom. Good night, he replied, settling on his side of the bed that now felt like an ocean between us. I lay awake listening to his breathing, plotting my next moves like a chess player in a critical match. Somewhere in this tangled web of lies, I knew there had to be a single thread that would unravel it all. The next morning, I was ready earlier than usual, driven by the need to know more about the mysterious woman who had shattered my husband's loyalty. I'm going to Alice's today, I told Douglas over breakfast. She wants help choosing curtains. Douglas nodded absently, his eyes glued to his smartphone. Right, give her my love. Instead of going to my daughter's, I returned to the cafe across from Douglas's office, this time armed with my notebook. Would you like another coffee? Asked the kind waitress who remembered me. Yes, please. I hesitated for a moment before continuing. By the way, do you often see that silver-haired gentleman in the blue suit from the tall building? The waitress smiled knowingly. Oh, Mr. Smith? He comes in regularly, usually with a very attractive blonde woman. My heart lurched painfully in my chest. Really? How long has this been going on? A few months, maybe longer. I think she's a realtor from Silver Key Realty. Morgan, I believe that's her name. Finally, a name, I whispered to myself. I pulled out my smartphone and searched for Silver Key Realty's website. On the ER team page, I found her, Morgan Williams. Luxury real estate specialist. Age 45. I stared at the smiling blonde in the photograph, whispering to myself, 20 years younger than me. Just then, I saw Douglas emerge from the building, and there she was beside him. Morgan. She was even more beautiful than her photo, her hair gleaming in the sunlight as she walked gracefully in her high heels. Douglas held the Ford's door open for her, just as he used to do for me in what now felt like another lifetime. Check, please, I said, reaching for my wallet. Oh, don't worry about that, the waitress replied with a sympathetic smile. Mr. Smith always takes care of it. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Yes, he told us you were his sister and asked us to look after you. I felt the color drain from my face as realization hit me like a physical blow. He knew all along, I whispered to myself, my hands trembling. Back home, I went straight to my computer, my heart pounding with dread and determination. Morgan's social media pages revealed more than all my surveillance combined. A perfect evening with someone special, read one caption beneath a photo where I could just make out the edge of Douglas's suit. New life needs a new home, declared another post from a month ago, showing her with an extravagant bracelet. One I recognized from the bank statements. The phone's ring interrupted my investigation. Abigail? Jody's voice was filled with concern. Are you sitting down? What is it? I asked, my grip tightening on the receiver. I was at the beauty salon, and guess who was in the chair next to me? I clutched the phone harder. It was her. Yes, and she was on the phone with Douglas, planning a trip to Europe next month. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself against this new blow. What else did you hear? They were talking about money. She said everything would be ready soon and they'd be free. Just then, I heard the front door open. I'll call you back, I whispered hurriedly and hung up. Douglas walked into the study carrying a large envelope. Oh, you're home, he said with practiced casualness. How did it go with Alice's curtains? I changed my mind, I replied, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that surprised even me. So, how was your day? Did you get a lot done?
Yeah.
I'm exhausted, going to take a shower, he said, retreating like a guilty man. After he left, I looked down at my hands and noticed they weren't trembling anymore. A strange calmness had settled over me, like the eye of a hurricane. I've seen enough, I thought to myself. It's time to act. I'd always prided myself on being an intelligent woman, having worked my way up to chief financial officer at the city's largest bank over 30 years. Now it was time to put that expertise to use. In my study, I had collected all the evidence like a meticulous prosecutor building a case. Bank statements, photographs, recorded conversations, and observation notes. He thinks I'm just a foolish old woman, I whispered, spreading the documents across my desk like a general planning a battle. Does he really expect me to just fade away quietly? The doorbell's sudden ring cut through my thoughts. It was Randy, an old friend and colleague from my banking days. "Hello, Abigail," he said, stepping into my study. "I brought what you asked for." Randy placed an old file on my desk, its edges worn with time. "The counterfeit currency fraud case from '93. You remember?" "How could I forget?" I replied, memories flooding back. "We spent months working on that one." Randy settled into a chair, studying me with concern. "So why do you need information about a case from so long ago?" I walked to the window, gathering my thoughts. "Randy, are you still in touch with Charles? Charles Johnson?"
Yeah.
"We meet occasionally. He's teaching at the university now, but still maintains his collection." I returned to my desk and said, "I need his help, but this has to stay between us." Randy fixed me with a steady gaze. "Abigail, what's really going on?" I sat down and told him everything. About Douglas, Morgan, the secret accounts, and their escape plans. "Good God," Randy whispered when I finished. "What are you going to do?" "A counterfeiter deserves to be paid in kind," I said with a bitter smile playing across my lips. "Let them taste their own medicine." Randy stroked his chin thoughtfully, considering my words. "Charles might be able to help. His copies could fool even the experts. But the risks are high." "Life is nothing but risks," I replied with steel in my voice. "Call him, tell him it's a personal favor for me." After Randy left, I sat in silence for a long time, refining my plan like a master jeweler perfecting a precious stone. I remembered Douglas's words from years ago, now dripping with irony. "Money is just paper, what matters is trust." "Well," I whispered to the empty room, "let's see how you feel about your own philosophy." 2 days later, I met Charles Johnson in his university office, where time seemed to stand still among the dusty books. "This is a delicate matter," Charles said, peering at me over his glasses. "You understand my collector's copies aren't meant for circulation?" "Of course, this is purely for demonstration purposes." Charles nodded, his academic demeanor never wavering. "How much do you need?" $120,000. Charles whistled low. "That's quite a collection, it will take time." "Time I have plenty of," I responded coolly. "Quality is what matters." On my way home, I stopped at the bank where Douglas and I held our joint safe deposit box. Inside lay the real cash, our marriage transformed into neat stacks of bills. "Soon," I whispered to myself. "Everything changes soon." At home, Douglas greeted me with unusual warmth, like a man trying to warm himself by a fire he himself had extinguished. "Where were you?" I was worried. "Oh, just meeting an old friend," I replied with practiced casualness. "Talking about the old days." He kissed my cheek with familiar tenderness that now felt like a stranger's touch. "I'm glad you're not lonely here by yourself." If only you knew, I thought to myself. If only you knew what's coming. For 2 weeks, I waited for Charles's call, my heart jumping like a startled bird every time the phone rang. During that time, I memorized Douglas's schedule with the precision of a military strategist. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he met Morgan at their usual restaurant, and on Fridays, he visited Everest National Bank, presumably preparing their escape fund. Finally, on Wednesday morning, Charles's message arrived like an answered prayer. The collection is complete. Meet me at the university library at 3 p.m. I'm going to the beauty salon, I told Douglas over our morning coffee. Might do some shopping afterward. All right, just don't spend too much, he replied without looking up from his newspaper, his casual dismissal another small betrayal. At the library, Charles waited for me in the rare manuscripts section, his face etched with concern. Abigail, are you absolutely sure about this? I nodded with the certainty of a woman who had crossed the point of no return. Absolutely. He handed me a small suitcase that felt heavy with more than just paper. It's all here, each one perfect. But remember, these are. I know, I cut him off, my voice steady. They're just visual materials. On the drive home, the suitcase felt like lead in my hands. $120,000, I whispered to myself. The price of betrayal. Back home, I went straight to our bedroom, my heart thundering in my chest. The safe was hidden behind a painting, such a cliché, but Douglas always did prefer simplicity. I could hardly wait to see Douglas's face when he checked the safe's contents the next day. It's only a matter of time before everything comes to light, I whispered to myself as I quietly left the room. I entered our wedding date as the combination to the safe, feeling a bitter irony. At least this hasn't changed, I murmured with a mix of sadness and contempt. I began carefully removing the real money and replacing it with the counterfeits, my years of handling cash at the bank making my movements precise and confident. Each stack went back exactly where it had been, a perfect mirror of what Douglas would expect to find. My hands were steady. My years of experience in banking came in handy. Suddenly, I heard a car pulling up to the house, and my heart leaped into my throat. Douglas wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Stay calm, I whispered to myself like a mantra. Keep your head. I quickly secured the last bundle in the safe, concealed the real money in the suitcase, and shoved it under the bed. At that moment, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Abigail? Douglas's voice called from downstairs. In the bedroom, I called back, working to keep my voice natural. Just doing some cleaning. The footsteps drew closer to the door. I hastily grabbed a dusting cloth and began wiping the vanity. You're home early, I said as Douglas entered. Meeting got cancelled, he said, kissing my cheek with familiar ease. Did you go to the salon? Your hair looks beautiful. Thank you, I replied, feeling my pulse racing in my throat. I need to get something from the safe, he said, moving toward the painting. I froze, but kept wiping the table, my movements mechanical. Of course, I said, watching him in the mirror as he opened the safe. Douglas removed several bundles of bills and placed them in his briefcase. Everything all right? I asked. Oh yes, fine, he replied. Just need to pay some invoices for the new project. He closed the safe and said, won't be back before dinner. Got an important meeting. Out with Morgan at their restaurant, I thought bitterly to myself. A place he's never once taken me. After Douglas left, I collapsed onto the bed, my heart still racing like a wild thing in my chest. I reached for the phone and dialed Jody's number with trembling fingers. It's done, now we wait. Are you sure he won't notice? My friend asked, concern evident in her voice. Charles is a genuine artist, even I couldn't tell the difference if I didn't know. That night when Douglas came home, he was wearing Morgan's perfume like a badge of his infidelity. He looked pleased with himself, like a cat who'd gotten into the cream. "How was your meeting?" I asked, pouring him tea with steady hands that betrayed none of my inner turmoil. "Very productive," he replied, smug satisfaction in his voice. "There should be some good news soon." Indeed, I thought to myself. Very good news indeed. That night, sleep eluded me like a shy lover. The suitcase under the bed seemed to burn through the floorboards, the real money inside a testament to my husband's betrayal. But I knew this was just the beginning of my carefully orchestrated revenge. I turned on my side, watching my sleeping husband of 42 years. Thousands of nights, countless stories shared, all those dreams we'd woven together in the dark. And he's throwing it all away for a younger woman and a new life. "Good night," I whispered into the darkness. "Soon you'll wake up to a very different reality." The next week brought obvious changes in Douglas's behavior. He grew restless, constantly checking the safe, spending hours whispering into his phone like a guilty teenager. One morning, I overheard him talking in his study, his voice low and excited. "Yes, everything's ready. I've got the tickets, first class, of course. No one knows a thing. Except me," I thought, standing silently outside the door. "It's next week," Douglas continued. "Don't worry, Morgan, I've got all the money. Everything's been taken care of." I smiled quietly, remembering how I'd spotted him hiding European travel guides the night before. When Douglas finished his call, I announced, "Breakfast is ready." At the table, Douglas was unusually chatty, practically bubbling with barely contained excitement. "Say, I've been thinking we should have a party, invite friends over like we used to," he suggested. I raised an eyebrow, suspicion coiling in my stomach. "A party? What's the occasion?" "Oh, nothing special," he shrugged with practiced casualness. "Life's short, right? We should enjoy the moment." A farewell party, I realized with bitter clarity. His final act before disappearing. "Sounds lovely," I said aloud. "When were you thinking?" "How about Saturday?" he suggested with feigned indifference. "Just close friends, nothing fancy." I nodded, already plotting my own performance. "I'll start making arrangements." While I began organizing the invitations, Douglas busied himself in his study with his papers. Several times, I watched him transfer cash from the safe to a small suitcase, which he then hid in the garage like a guilty schoolboy hiding stolen cookies. That evening, Alice called. "Mom, Dad invited us to a party. Don't you think that's odd?" "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "He's never been one for gatherings before." "Why now?" "Maybe he's missing his family." "Mom," Alice's voice grew serious. "Is everything really okay?" I sighed, the weight of secrets heavy on my shoulders. "Come to the party, dear. I promise it will be interesting." On Friday, the day before the party, Douglas made another trip to Everest National Bank. I watched him emerge from the bank with a small suitcase clutched in his hand. "His final preparations," I whispered, dialing Jody's number with steady fingers. "Is he really planning to leave after the party?" my friend asked anxiously. "Of course, I found the tickets in his study." Sunday's flight to Paris. "Oh, Abigail, what are you going to do?" "Follow the plan perfectly. Let him taste the bitterness of betrayal." That night, Douglas came home unusually tender, bearing flowers like a guilty lover. He suggested watching an old movie together, one from our early years. "You know," he said, holding me close like he used to years ago. "Meeting you was the luckiest thing that ever happened to me." I felt emotion catch in my throat like a trapped bird. "Do you really mean that?" I think about it all the time. You're the most reliable support I've ever had. Support, I thought bitterly. Not love, not friendship. Just support. And you're mine, I replied, carefully keeping the acid from my voice. In the middle of the night, I heard him in his study, opening the safe, shuffling papers. Later, his footsteps whispered down to the garage like a guilty thief. Making preparations, I thought to myself. Packing for his new life. I lay in the darkness, thinking about tomorrow's party. I imagined the shocked faces of our guests when the truth came out, pictured Morgan's reaction when she tried to use the counterfeit money. Sometimes, I whispered into the darkness. The perfect revenge is giving someone exactly what they wish for. Saturday morning dawned in chaos as party preparations began. I was up with the sun, moving like a general preparing for battle. Douglas, who usually slept late on weekends, surprisingly appeared at 7. "Need any help?" he asked, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. "No, I'm fine," I replied, noting how frequently he checked his watch. Around noon, Jody called. "Are you ready?" she whispered conspiratorially. I answered with complete confidence, "Everything's ready, down to the last detail." "Did you bring the documents I asked for?" "Yes, I have them, but Abigail, are you absolutely sure about this?" This became necessary the moment he decided to destroy our life together. By 5 o'clock, guests began arriving in waves like a perfectly orchestrated symphony. Alice arrived first with her husband and children, and she immediately sensed the strange undercurrent in the house. "Mom," Alice pulled me aside gently, concern etched on her face. "What's going on?" "Dad's acting strange." I hugged my daughter close, breathing in her familiar scent. "Just watch, everything will become clear very soon." Meanwhile, Douglas was playing the perfect host like an actor in his final performance. He told jokes, proposed toasts, and thanked everyone for coming, but I noticed how he kept checking his phone and watching the clock. At 7, Douglas approached me with practiced casualness. "I need to run to the office. Forgot some papers for tomorrow's meeting." "On Sunday?" I asked quietly. "Yes, international meeting, time zones and all that," he replied, still avoiding my eyes. I nodded, playing my part perfectly. "Of course, be careful." I heard him climb the stairs, enter our bedroom, and open the safe. Minutes later, he came down with a small suitcase. "Everything all right?" I asked, eyeing the suitcase meaningfully. "Yes, just some paperwork." He kissed my cheek and said, "I'll be right back." I watched from the window as his car disappeared around the curve, taking with it 22 years of lies. Jody appeared at my side like a faithful sentinel. "He's gone." Yes, I turned to face our guests and announced, "Now, let's start the real party." I raised my glass and tapped it gently with a fork. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said in a quiet voice that somehow carried through the room. "My husband Douglas is currently heading to the airport with a suitcase containing $120,000, money withdrawn from our joint accounts, planning to escape to Europe with his mistress, Morgan." The room fell into a silence so profound you could hear a pin drop. Every eye in the room turned to me like spotlights on a stage. Alice stared at me, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "Mom, is this true?" Her voice trembled with the question. I nodded slowly, my composure as steady as a rock in a stormy sea. "Yes, and I have all the evidence." I caught Jody's eye, and she placed a thick stack of documents on the table like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Here are the records of Douglas's secret account, his dealings in counterfeit money, and detailed plans for his escape with Morgan." One of the guests picked up the papers, and they began passing them around like a deck of cards dealing out ugly truths. "I can't believe he would do something like this," someone whispered, their voice thick with shock. But what's this about counterfeit money? Another guest asked, leaning forward with intense curiosity. I smiled, the expression more predatory than pleasant. Most of the money he's carrying is fake. Perfect replicas, but worthless. A wave of murmurs swept through the room like wind through autumn leaves. So when he tries to use that money in Europe? Someone began. It will be discovered immediately, I finished, my voice as cool and crisp as a winter morning. Jody came forward and embraced me like a sister in arms. Alice, still reeling from shock, rushed to my side, her face pale with disbelief. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" she whispered through trembling lips. "Sometimes," I said softly, my voice carrying years of quiet wisdom. "The perfect answer is giving someone exactly what they desire." Douglas wanted to escape with money, so I gave him that chance. Just then, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through the tension like a knife. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" I answered with perfect composure. "Mrs. Smith," an unfamiliar voice inquired. "Airport security here." I smiled, feeling the final pieces of my plan falling into place. "Yes, I know, my husband is attempting to check in with counterfeit money." The line went silent for a moment, heavy with implication. "Please inform him that the real money is in a safe place, and his mistress might not be waiting for him in Paris." I hung up and turned back to my stunned guests, my composure never wavering. "Now then, let's have another glass of wine. We have quite a story to tell tonight." After the party, sleep eluded me entirely. Alice offered to stay, but I declined with a gentle shake of my head. "I need to be alone, dear. Go home to your children." At 3 in the morning, the phone rang again. "Mrs. Smith?" It was the police station. "Your husband would like to speak with you. When he's released and home, we'll talk," I replied with ice in my voice. Around 8 o'clock, Douglas finally returned, looking a decade older than when he'd left. His suit was wrinkled, his shirt disheveled, his silver hair a mess. "Why would you do this?" he demanded the moment he crossed the threshold. I sat in my favorite chair, calmly sipping my morning coffee like any other day. "Sit down, Douglas. Let's talk." "Talk," he nearly shouted, his composure completely shattered. "You humiliated me. Made me look like a fool. I spent the night in police custody. What were you thinking?" I responded, my voice sharp as a steel blade. "Running away with money? Abandoning your wife, children, and grandchildren?" He collapsed onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands like a broken man. "Morgan was waiting for me at the airport, but when the police discovered the counterfeit money, she left. Didn't even look back." "Of course she did." I took another sip of my coffee, savoring its bitter warmth. "She wanted a romantic escape, not a police scandal." Just then, the doorbell rang like a jarring note in an already discordant symphony. Morgan stood there, her makeup smeared beneath her eyes, her face contorted with rage. "You," she lunged toward me, fury radiating from every pore. "You ruined everything." I set my cup down with deliberate calm. "I didn't ruin anything. You did that yourselves. Douglas told me he loved me. Said we'd start a new life together." "Love?" I rose from my chair, 42 years of dignity in my stance. "Do you really think that was love? He wanted a young mistress, you wanted his money. That's all this ever was." Douglas looked between us like a trapped animal. "Morgan, I can explain everything." "Explain?" She whirled on him, her voice dripping with scorn. "Explain what? That you couldn't even tell real money from fake? Do you have any idea what this could do to my reputation?" I watched this exchange with the detached interest of a theater critic at a mediocre play. Even as I witnessed my 42-year marriage crumbling before my eyes, my heart remained strangely peaceful. The real money is right here. I reached beneath my chair and pulled out the suitcase. After the divorce, Douglas, you can take your share. Morgan rushed to the suitcase like a moth to flame. It's all here. 120,000. So he told you the exact amount, I smiled, watching understanding dawn on her face. But this money belongs to the Smith family, of which you are not a member. Morgan's face flushed with anger. You're nothing but a useless old woman. He might have been unhappy with me, I replied with glacial calm. But now he's even more miserable with you. Can you feel the difference? At that moment, Alice walked in, taking in the scene before freezing in the doorway. What is she doing here? She's just leaving, I replied with quiet authority. Aren't you? I turned to Morgan, who stared at Douglas, then the suitcase, then back at me like a trapped animal looking for escape. This is ridiculous, she shrieked and stormed out of the house like a fury unleashed. The room fell into a silence as heavy as a funeral pall. Douglas slumped onto the sofa, a broken man stripped of his pretenses. What happens now? He asked in a whisper. Now. I exchanged glances with our daughter. Now you pack your things and leave. My lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings. But what about our 42 years? You should have thought about those years when you were planning your escape. Alice spoke up then, her voice as sharp as cut glass. That's right, Dad. Get out, right now. Douglas sat in silence for what felt like an eternity before slowly rising to his feet. All right, he said, his voice as tired as his crumpled appearance. I'll pack and go. Alice showed no emotion at his words, just nodded with the quiet dignity she'd inherited from me. Alice, you don't need to help. Your father can manage on his own. Alice stood beside me, arms crossed, a pillar of strength at my side. I understand, Mom. Douglas started up the stairs, his shoulders stooped like an old man's. Gone was the confident businessman I'd known for so many years. After he disappeared upstairs, Alice turned to me. Mom, are you sure this is what you want? I took a deep breath and smiled at my daughter, feeling lighter than I had in years. Yes, this is exactly what I want. I can't live a life built on lies anymore. A few minutes later, Douglas came down with his suitcase. He paused at the door and turned back. Abigail, I'm sorry. I'll send the rest of your things later, I called after his diminished figure. Don't bother trying to contact Morgan. She's already found someone new, a wealthy lawyer who just moved to town. Months passed, and autumn painted the garden trees in brilliant colors, my garden now, which I tended alone. The divorce proceedings went smoothly, with Douglas offering no resistance about the division of assets. Perhaps he was still ashamed of his failure. One Sunday morning, I sat on the porch drinking coffee with Jody, the autumn breeze gentle against our faces. Have you heard the latest? Jody asked with practiced casualness. Morgan ended up marrying that lawyer. I smiled, unsurprised by this predictable turn of events. I'm sure she checked his safe first. And Douglas? Jody asked hesitantly. He moved to another town, I replied, my voice neutral. Alice tells me he's working for a small construction company now, living in a rented apartment. Do you feel sorry for him? I gazed out at my garden, watching the leaves dance in the breeze. I feel sorry for the years we spent believing in our life together, but not for him. Just then, Alice's car pulled into the driveway, and my grandchildren burst out like rays of sunshine. They rushed to embrace me, their love pure and uncomplicated. Grandma, we brought your favorite cake. That's not all, Alice smiled, pulling a bag from the car. Mom, I've signed you up for Italian classes, You've always wanted to learn, remember? I hugged my daughter with tears in my eyes. Thank you, but no buts. You've put your dreams on hold long enough, for work, for dad. Now it's your turn. During lunch in the garden, Jody raised her glass. To new beginnings. And, I added with a smile, to old friends who helped make this new life possible. That night, after everyone had gone, I went up to my study. On the desk lay the manuscript I'd been working on, tentatively titled, How to Spot and Survive Betrayal. The phone rang, breaking the evening silence. It was my old colleague from the bank, her voice full of excitement. Abigail, you won't believe this, she exclaimed. Remember that charity organization? They're looking for a financial advisor now. And you thought of me? I smiled into the receiver. Who else? No one has your experience and knowledge. After ending the call, I walked to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm hues. Next door, a young couple was renovating their house, their laughter drifting through the evening air. Life goes on, I whispered to myself. On my desk lay a travel brochure, my long-dreamed-of trip to Italy finally within reach. Beside it sat the Italian language class schedule and an invitation to a local animal shelter's charity event. I sat at my desk and opened my journal, my pen poised with purpose. Today I realized that Douglas's betrayal wasn't the end of my life, but the beginning of a new one. I no longer need to live according to someone else's wishes, hiding my dreams or postponing my plans. I am the protagonist of my own story. And at 65, my life is just beginning. P.S. Don't forget to book the Venice tickets and contact the charity organization. As I closed the journal, a strange peace settled over me like a warm blanket. Outside my window, birds were singing their evening songs, and the scent of freshly baked cake wafted up from the kitchen. When morning came, the house, the garden, and my life would all truly be mine. To new beginnings, I whispered, raising my teacup. And to the wisdom of valuing myself more than someone else's promises.